But today I want to start by showing a little video that I've created. If you can't see this, feel free to move around. I know the chandelier can get in the way of a couple people, but it's about a 3-minute long clip, and what this is it's a summary of the fun day that we had. So it's got a lot of clips, got a lot of pictures of what we've done.
The moon and stars, they wept. The morning sun was dead. The Savior of the world was fallen. His body on the cross, His blood poured out for us. The weight of every curse upon Him. Final breath He gave as heaven looked away. The Son of God was laid in darkness. A battle in the grave. The war on death was waged. The power of hell forever broken. The ground began to shake, the storms rolled away. His perfect love could not be overcome. Now death, where is your sting? Our resurrected King has rendered you defeated. Forever He is glorified. Forever He is lifted high. Forever He is risen. He is alive. He is alive. The ground began to shake, the storms rolled away. His perfect love cannot be overcome. Now death, where is your sting? Our resurrected King has rendered you defeated. Forever He is glorified. Forever He is lifted high. Forever He is risen. He is alive. He is alive.
Alright, so I put that clip together just for, I know there were a lot of people who wanted to come, who wasn't able to come, and then a lot of people who were in one section that didn't get to see other sections. But I hope you guys enjoyed that. I did the best with what I did. I gave the camera back there and only ended up with one class's photos. So I'm not discriminating against anybody in their classes, but just doing with, making a video with what I have. But today we're going to be looking at a story in Luke chapter 9. If you guys want to go ahead and flip there, I'm going to introduce what we're going to be doing for the next month. Now, if you know anything about this month, you know that Easter is right in the middle of this month. It's the third week this month. What we're going to do is we're going to be studying the cross. Now, we're not just going to be studying Jesus on the cross for 5 weeks, don't worry. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing the first 2 weeks here. We're going to be looking at how Jesus addresses the cross before He dies on it. Spoiler alert. I mean, I'm assuming everyone here knows that's the eventual outcome. But then on Easter, we're going to, of course, look at the death of Jesus on the cross and what that means. And then afterwards, we're going to spend 2 more weeks looking at how the early church viewed the cross. how they viewed what happened on it. And we'll see as we go through the difference between what happened before Jesus died, the view of the cross before he passed away on the cross, and then the view of the cross after he had risen. And we'll see that contrast by the beginning of the week, beginning of the month, and by the end of the month, and how all of that changes. But today, the first story is Luke chapter 9, and we're going to be in verses 18 through 27. And we're going to, it encapsulates a couple of stories, but if you're interested, I'm going to go ahead and say what the next 5 weeks are going to be about. The first is obviously this Luke passage. The next week is Matthew chapter 10, verses 34 through 39. And then the third week, we're going to be looking at all four Gospels' view on the death of Christ. And then we're going to be in 1 Corinthians 2, in Galatians 6, and then the last week we're going to be in Colossians chapter 2. Now, I'm assuming none of you wrote that down. You might not really care, but if you do, afterwards, feel free. I got it written down if you want to go ahead and read them. But like I said, today we're going to be in Luke chapter 9, verses 18 and following. But I'm going to break it up in a couple different places, but we're going to first look at a pretty popular character in the Bible's confession, his moment that he realized who Jesus was. So, if you want to turn there with me, feel free, Luke chapter 9, verse 18, or you can just listen as I read it. But verse 18 and following says, "Now it happened that as he was praying alone, Jesus, the disciples were with him. And he asked them, 'Who do the crowds say that I am?' And they answered, 'John the Baptist. But others say Elijah. And others, that one of the prophets of old has risen.' Then he said to them, 'But who do you say that I am?' And Peter answered, 'The Christ of God, the Messiah of God.'" Now this is the first place in the Bible that we see a confession, a full-blown confession. Now Peter, he had heard all the stories that everyone else had said. It's just John the Baptist, it's just Elijah, all these, he's just a prophet from old, risen again. He's not really the Son of God, he's not really the Messiah or the Christ. And Jesus knows that's what people are saying about him. But he turns to his disciples, the closest followers of him. And he starts asking them, well, who do you say that? And then in this moment, Peter says, "You are the Christ. You're the Son of God." He puts it all on the line. He says, "You are the chosen one. You're the Messiah. You're the one sent from heaven. You are God." And you think, finally, the disciples are starting to figure it out. Peter, he's made the first step. He's going to, continue on. The other disciples are going to fall in suit. They're all going to finish the book devoted to Christ, everything he does. They won't be surprised. They'll follow him every step of the way. It would be great if that happened, but we see Jesus start warning what this statement is all about. He says, "Good, okay, you got the basics down. You understand who I am. But I'm not always who you thought I was going to be." You see, the Jews at this time, a lot of the people who even thought there was going to be a Messiah, thought he would be some ruler, thought he would be some king, thought he would kill a bunch of people, he would lead an army, he would oppress all the Roman soldiers, all the Roman government officials, that they would make the Jewish nation kings and queens among everyone. But right after this, right after Peter says, "You are the Christ, you are the Messiah, you're the chosen one, you are God," Jesus starts to say something very interesting. In verse 21 he says, "And he strictly charged and commanded them to tell this to no one, saying, 'The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised.'" Now, if you're Peter, this isn't what you really want to hear from someone you just put all your faith in. That's like someone signing this big, long contract with you. You say, "I will provide for you for 10 years. And they say, "Oh, by the way, next week, I'm going to go on vacation and I'm not coming back." It's like, well, okay, then what was the point of this plan? If there wasn't this mutual agreement and all this, then what is it all about? And Jesus says, if you want to follow me, you have to understand what is coming. You have to understand what I'm about to go through. He said, all those leaders, the scribes, the priests, the scribes, the elders, and chief priests, all those leaders that you look at, all those leaders of the world that you want to be, said, those people are going to hate me. They are going to reject me. And he said, if you're trying to find comfort in their eyes, you're not going to find it. He said, if you follow me, you will have to be also rejected by all of these people. And it's a tough pill to swallow. If I'm going to fully devote my entire life to someone, and they say, and by the way, in a couple of years, I'm going to die, and I'm not going to be here to lead you anymore. Oh, by the way, the people that you thought were going to help you lead after I died, they're going to hate you too. Matter of fact, everyone who's in a leadership position will hate you for following me. And you can kind of imagine what Peter is thinking. He finally got all these connections in line, and he finally realizes that Jesus is the Messiah. And that Jesus starts talking about how difficult the next coming little bit will be. Let's see what then Jesus says to them, specifically Peter and the other disciples. After Peter confessed that he is Christ, and after Jesus had warned him how difficult it was going to be. In verse 23 and following. It says, and he said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words, of him will the Son of God be ashamed, when he comes in his glory and the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. But I tell you truly, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God. Now, that's a difficult passage. It's kind of weird to understand. But let's take the bigger picture and look and see what he's saying. Peter's made the confession. He says, I'm going to follow you. And Jesus said, it might not be what you think it's going to be. And he goes, matter of fact, if you're going to follow me, you are going to have to pick up your cross daily. Now, this is the first time we're introduced to the word the cross in the Gospels of Luke. And you got to remember, at this point, the cross only meant death. It only meant heartache. It only meant destruction. It only meant the loss of life. There was no hope. There was no love in the cross. There was nothing. And Jesus says, to follow me, you have to pick up your cross daily. And what he's saying it's going to be tough and it's going to be difficult. I like when he goes on and he says, helps if I'm on the right page. Says, for what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits his soul? He's saying, well, what does it matter if you reject me? If you profit the entire world, if you don't pick up your cross, what will you actually gain? In verse 24 it says, for whoever would save his life will lose it. Now this is the kind of cross talk that they were expecting. If the cross was in a sentence, there was death immediately after the word, or at least in the next sentence. If anybody was going to die on the cross, they were going to be thrown away. They were going to be discarded. They were, marked as enemies against the Roman Empire. They were marked as cursed by the Jewish officials. See, there was nothing good about the cross. But you see, for them to carry their cross daily meant that those things that they struggled with, those things in their life that deserved death, they had to carry each and every day. Now, I don't know about you, but when I first became a Christian, I wasn't really I didn't really understand what that meant. You know, I confessed Christ, I got baptized, I started going to, well, I went to church anyways, but I started going to more things at the church. I was like, all right, I'm on track, I'm doing all these things. And then one of my friends, it was my cousin, he started asking me what it meant to be a Christian. And we talked, and he said some different stuff. He said, so does it mean you don't cuss anymore? I was like, oh, yeah, that sounds good. So for a little bit, that was my Christianity. I didn't cuss. Little known secret, I didn't like to anyways. So for me, being a Christian was exactly the same way of living as before I did. Never had the urge to cuss before, and then as I became a Christian, that was what I said I was good at. Oh, I'm not going to cuss, I'm going to be a good example. But really, that didn't mean anything to me. I was already doing it. It meant nothing to me. There was no big milestone in my life. It was just something that I kept doing. There might be something in your life that you feel this way, or you've dealt with the same way. That your Christianity is all about not doing this or doing this. But when you think about it, it doesn't really push you. It doesn't really challenge you. It doesn't stretch you. It's something you would have done anyways if you were a Christian or not. And Jesus says that's not what being a follower of me is all about. So it's not just about staying the same and calling yourself a Christian. Jesus said it's a major moment in your life where you go and you pick up your cross daily. You carry your burdens everywhere you go. You understand the challenge that comes with being a Christian. You understand that the leaders of the world will hate you. And the people that you feel like should be on your side might not be. And every step along the way, it's going to be difficult. You're going to want to put your cross down. You're going to want to walk away. But he says, what is it if you gain the entire world, if you gain the admonishment of everyone around you, if you gain all the money, all the wealth, everyone looks at you in great standards, but you lose your soul. You lose your life. You lose your relationship with God. He says, what is it? Is it worth laying down a cross simply so that you can gain the world around you? Peter, he had this moment of confession. He said, finally, God, you are Jesus, you are God, you are Christ, you are the Messiah, the chosen one. And Jesus said, finally, thanks, I'm sure, after all of this preaching to him. But he sits back and says, okay, now let me tell you what you're getting yourself into. And we see what he means about a cross before the crucifixion happens. Now remember, these first 2 weeks, we're going to be looking at the cross before it meant redemption, before it meant hope, before it meant life. So every time we talk about the cross, it's going to have a negative connotation. It's going to have this negative tone. But I hope that we wouldn't just get focused on this and forget the rest of the month, and we continue to look ahead to it. But as I was reading this and I was studying this idea of the cross, I really started to think about what Christianity meant to me and what sacrifices I was willing to give. That's when I started thinking about what Christianity meant to me when I was young. I started talking with one of my friends at school, and we started talking about how after you get baptized, after you give your life to Christ, your life will only get more difficult. I tell this to everybody, I tell this all the time. But the devil wants you to fall even more when you're a Christian. So every single day you're going to wake up, you're going to want to give it away. You're going to want to just take the week off and not be a Christian for the week. Take the month off maybe, it turns into a year. Turns into just not going to church, not following God, not praying at all. The devil wants that to happen. And Jesus says, if you want to follow me, it's going to be difficult. Everyone's not going to love you. It's easy to think that around here where it seems like mostly everyone's Christian. But when you look at a broader scale, there are people who hate us for simply believing in God. Everywhere we go, from the lowest of the lows to the highest of the highs, people are going to hate us for who we are. And Jesus said, is Christianity worth giving up that popularity, giving up that love. There are going to be situations in your life where you want to do something wholeheartedly, but you know the Bible says you shouldn't. And Jesus says, is it worth it to give up what you want because you know it's wrong? Jesus said there's this one thing in your life, whether it's anger, whether it's greed, whether it's resentment. Jesus says, is it worth hanging on to that and giving up Christianity? Giving up the hope that comes in Him. You see, a lot of the things He said in the New Testament foreshadowing, they didn't understand. If you notice, I quickly read through the part where He said, oh, by the way, I'm going to die and raise in 3 days. That's simply because that didn't mean anything to them. That's not any part. I don't understand that. I don't see that happening. What they focused on, though, was what it meant to follow Him. And they had to evaluate themselves. They had to say, is following Jesus worth everything that I have to give up? Is it worth carrying that burden every single day? Is it worth knowing, although you might want to do something, although you might want to go somewhere, you know you shouldn't, and you have to make the decision to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't. It's not that idea of things that you did before that carried over. I tell that story all the time about me and cussing, because for me it meant nothing. It was meaningless. And I'm sure, as I've talked to people at school, as I've talked to people out of school, there are things in their Christian life that they do, that they put as a foundational part of who they are, when in reality it doesn't have anything to do with them being a Christian. The job that they have, the house that they have, the family that they have, the friends that they have, the things that they do. They claim that's what's the foundational in their Christian life. But when you push it hard enough, when you push it far enough, it's not a devotion. It's not a sacrifice. It really doesn't mean anything. It's really easy to get stuck on this. See, on one side, we are commanded to carry our burdens each and every day. We are to carry our cross, a reminder of the death that we deserve. Each and every one of us, as much as I hate to think about it, each and every one of us deserve death for the life that we've lived. And that cross reminds us of it. That cross points to death. The cross points to destruction. And for Jesus to say, you must carry that every single day to be a follower of me, it can seem difficult. It can seem overwhelming. And quite frankly, it's not something we ever want to do. But we do have something that the disciples at this time didn't have. It's a idea of being able to look forward in the story. You see, as we go through the first two stories here, and as we end with the last two, we see they're building up and building away from the cross. This story and the next story build up to the cross. It makes you feel uncomfortable. It makes you kind of squirm in your seat. But that's the whole point. That's the writer's point. That's Jesus' point. It's to make you squirm. It's to make you say, is this really Christianity? Is this really what Jesus said? Is this really what I have to do? Do I really have to have a burden each and every day of my life? And as we build up to the cross, Jesus will answer that question, but He tells His disciples, He reminds them, the cross that represents death, destruction, you wear it each and every day. Now, a lot of times we wear a cross necklace or something like this, and I was joking with my friend, he started wearing one, and I said he's wearing his cross on the front. That's bad. I don't want to make that joke because it was so bad. You know, we can kind of think of it like that, but in reality, it's much more than, a necklace. It's much more than a charm bracelet. Wearing the cross on our back signifies who we are. And we'll see as Jesus laid on the cross, as he gave his life on the cross, it didn't stay with him. As much as we look at those cross necklaces or those crosses that have Jesus on it, that's not his final place. And those burdens that we have to carry every single day, those sins that we struggle with, those things that God keeps pecking away and saying, you need to change this, you need to change this, you need to do this differently, you need to stop doing this. Those little things, as God starts trying to chip away and find the inner part of who we are, that burden on our life, we carry it every day. But there's two different ways of looking at it. There's one way of looking at it, despair. Saying, God, why would I have to carry my burden? I'm free. I'm lifted. So why do I need to even think about what I'm doing? Why do I need to think about my sin? The other way, though, is giving a little clue of who we are in God's plan. For me as a pastor, as a minister, especially going to school with other ministers, it's easy for me to kind of get on my high horse about a lot of things. It's easy for me as a minister to make these claims, to make these statements. But then I have to realize, man, I have to carry my cross daily too. I stand in front of you guys and preach. I stand in front of you guys and teach, and I lead you guys, your children. I do my best, but when it comes to it, I carry my cross daily because I'm reminded that I'm not God. I don't have everything figured out. That honestly, myself, I deserve death. But if you know the rest of the story, you realize death is not the final ending of the cross. Carrying our cross daily means a lot more after what Jesus did. But I want to put you guys in the mindset as we go these first 2 weeks, the disciples were in. We'll get to what happens later, but I want you guys to feel what the disciples felt when Jesus said, to follow me, you must carry your cross daily. You must carry your burdens. You must remember that you are not God, that you are sinners. And I hope it makes you squirm, because it makes me squirm as I read it. But don't leave me now. Don't leave after this week now. I'm hoping you'll be here for the rest of the week, because if you leave here, you're not going to get the full point of what I'm trying to say. But if you come next week, and you come the third week, and you come the last 2 weeks, you'll see where we're going with this. My challenge, though, is two things. Think about what sacrifices you have to give up to be a Christian. I can't remember where I was reading it this week. I think it was Christianity Today. Might have been somewhere else. But it said, if you haven't given up anything to be a Christian, you're not following Christ. If you haven't given up anything in your Christian walk, then you're not following Christ. What that means is that we shouldn't be able to live a perfect life in our world and not have to change. That's what Jesus is poking at. He says, everyone that you want, everything that you think you need, you can't chase after those. If you do, you'll throw away your life. You'll throw away that salvation. And the second thing is to remember our place in His plan. To remember that on our backs, we carry the crosses that we deserve. When Jesus said, carry your cross daily, He meant for us to remember who we are in His plan. But as you realize, we're only 9 chapters into His plan. So like I said, don't leave here. Don't get this, don't feel awful about yourself. Don't, think you need to get baptized because you're a sinner, for the 15th, you need to get baptized for the 15th time. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not what Jesus is talking about. What Jesus is talking about is a simple reminder. So that's why I challenge you with these two things. The first is to figure out, how have you made that connection with God since you've made that confession? Have you stayed the same, or are you starting to change? Have you changed a lot? Hopefully you have. And the second part is a reminder of who we are. As much as we change after our confession, and as much hope as that is in our lives, when it comes to the cross, before Jesus died, it meant death and destruction and heartache. And I hope you guys this week would think about those two things I challenged you with. That you wouldn't get down, wouldn't get depressed, wouldn't get in despair, because remember, you guys know the story unlike the disciples, but I want you guys to think this week what the disciples would have thought with this message. Not knowing the cross, not knowing the resurrection, not knowing the ministry, in the 2,000 years of the church, what the disciples would have thought when Jesus said, to follow me, you must pick up your cross daily. You cannot stay the same, and you must remember who I am. Let's pray. Dear God, we come to you today to worship you. A couple thousand years after the sacrifice you gave, we're able to meet here. We're able to fellowship. We're able to look at the cross in a great light. But at one point, the disciples did not have this vision. And God, it's important for us to remember the cross didn't always represent hope. It didn't always represent redemption. At one point, it always meant death. So when you told us to pick up our cross daily, it meant a lot. It meant that we can't stay the same. We can't stay the same person that we were before. There must be a change. There must be a time when we pick up our cross and accept who we are. And God, there's a moment that comes with carrying our cross that reminds us that we cannot come down from the cross on our own. We might always have the cross on our back, but unlike you, God, we deserve it. It stays on our back. But God, as we get forward in this month, as we look forward to the future, into the moment that we know will happen, God, I pray that we continue to see hope, but also see it through the lens of the disciples. And see how impactful our lives must be when it comes to the cross. How much we must change. How much our lives should be dedicated to you because of the fact that we carry our cross daily. God, thank you for your Son who sacrificed, who changed the idea of the cross, who lived his life the way we wish we could, God. In his name we pray. Amen.